So today's webinar, it's numbers don't lie. I quite like doing this stuff. It's probably a little bit nerdy, but I think we all need to kind of get stuck into the numbers side of things at some stage or another. So it's a good opportunity to do so today. Now, today's going to be probably a bit more work for you guys, actually. So it's not just going to be half an hour of sitting here and consuming. So I've got a bit of an exercise for you to do, and hopefully we'll be able to get through that or majority of it in the time we have. And just to show you where we're at. So this is actually the profits course I've been taking. So I've taken cohort 1 through this first section, which is attracting engaged patients. Where we are today, we're inside a segment which I call simplify to multiply. And it's basically just looking at how we can look at people's wages in such a way that we can pay them fairly, but also do so in a simple fashion. Because I feel like in our sector in particular, wages are, dare I say, extremely complicated. And I think there's two factors at play. One is that we have to comply with an award, which is fundamentally extremely complicated. And then we're all trying to incentivize people in such a way based on the amount of people they see to drive our businesses. And I think those two things make it quite tricky for us. Now, frustration-wise, I think one of the biggest frustrations I hear from owners is this feeling that they're overpaying staff. And I think it comes back to not knowing exactly how to value these team members properly. And today, hopefully, we can change some of that, because everybody wants to be able to pay good wages that are consistent with solid performance from their team members. So, and the mistakes I think people make, what I commonly see is people just not being objective with the data that they actually have on hand. I think as owners, I think as health professionals especially, we like to make excuses for people. We like to see the positive side of things, and sometimes we aren't necessarily looking at the straight facts of the matter. Does that resonate with anybody? The big idea, yes, Stephs, thanks, Eve. The big idea is that numbers tell us a lot. Now, before we go further, I do want to say, like, you know, within the context of that course, this is one segment of an entire street. You know, it's one piece of a very large pie, which we use to determine wages. And the one thing I don't want you to take away is that we should just look at people's numbers and determine their wage. That is 100% not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to take that into context as the reality, as fundamentally like the most critical metric to ensure we're doing this correctly. So with wages, I think this is a bit of a tired metaphor, but what we measure we can manage is a fairly classic statement to make here. And the background, coming right back to, I put this together about 4 or 5 months ago, the Breakthrough Clinic Guide, but basically detailing out what I see in, this isn't really just physio businesses, it's more or less a model for all service-based businesses, including things like accountants and stuff. Wherever you have a rent expense and advertising costs and the like, and you've got staff who deliver services in exchange for money, you're going to find these models exist. And even though every physio clinic is different fundamentally in what we do and how we deliver it, the finance fundamentals don't change. Money doesn't really change that much. And for the majority of clinics, we need to look at how we can actually optimize the way we use our numbers to hit what would be an industry aim or standard of 15% earnings before interest, tax, deductions, amortization. So a 15% profit margin, so to speak. And when we look at these numbers, the unfortunate thing is most of them are non-negotiable. Once you've set your rent is your rent. Admin costs can fluctuate, but they tend to go up rather than down. Professional services, we can't compromise on accounting. We can't compromise on insurance. Advertising, if you turn your advertising off, you're going to find your revenue drops. And other costs like, you know, your pens and all the nitty-gritty stuff that goes into running a practice, we can't really do without them. So I actually find when we're looking at optimizing clinics, there's not really once we've got these things reasonably well optimized, there's not that much room for us to play. And, you know, for example, getting professional services to less than 5%, it's pretty hard. You need to be at a reasonably high revenue mark for that to even work for you. So a lot of these things, you know, same with admin costs, it's not that easy to get them to play ball. And as a result, it means that we're left with this threshold of about 50% for wages. And I include super in this. And I'm talking specifically about therapist wages. So a lot of people's P&Ls will include admin and the therapist wages in one column. I really think you want to separate those two out so that you can clearly see what this marginal cost is. This is probably the most important lever in any physio business. Every coach will tell you the same thing. When we go and change it, this is the first place we look to try and optimize. Are our therapists being utilized appropriately or billing enough for us? And the model today, it's a traffic light model where basically if you're in the red zone, that means you're billing less than double your total wage. So that's not ideal, and this is inclusive of your super and entitlements and everything. The yellow zone is people who are there or thereabouts, so we're reasonably okay with them. And the green zone is where we want everyone to be, which is billing more than double their wage. Cool. And what we'll do today, we're going to work out each staff member's break even threshold. So this isn't the rate in which, you know, they're bringing in enough money to pay for themselves. This is the rate where we're actually going to be sitting at a gross profit margin that looks more like that 50%. So basically the green zone, as I was talking about. We're going to determine their actual billings. We're actually going to look into this. Sorry, this is going to be painful. And from this, we're going to be able to determine if we're overpaying our therapists or if there's something wrong in that business. Now, there's a few assumptions here, and I'm sorry about these assumptions for the latter, because it's hard to do different clinics. Everyone has a slightly different formula for how they pay people and everything. I've tried to make this as clean and as applicable to everybody. The biggest assumption I'm making today, and I encourage you guys to go back and check this, because every time I do this, I find someone is being paid perhaps below their minimum entitlements, I'm assuming that everyone in your practice is being paid their minimum wage. This is a real ethical thing for me. I just think all physios should at the bare minimum be paid, you know, their base rates, their entitlements and whatnot. That's the legal requirements we're flying by. In my course, I go through this in a bit more detail so we can actually analyze this. But one, it's boring. Two, it takes a long time. So we're not going to do that today on a webinar. We're going to assume that that's happening. Going to assume that most people are running fairly stock standard clinics. 3 to 5 rooms is pretty standard, give or take. If you're running a 30-room clinic, some of this stuff might not be as easily extrapolated, but I think that doesn't include anyone here but today. And the last thing is, whenever I look at wages and whenever I talk about wages, I talk about it all inclusive, so inclusive of superannuation. And this is because your business still pays this figure. And I think we need to get that, as business owners, we need to get this into our vernacular, because staff don't see superannuation as their money. They see it as different money. Super annual leave, what it isn't is it's not money in your business. And if it's not in your business, it's their money, fundamentally. And people need to understand that conceptually, that this is quite a big slab now. Super used to be 9.5%. It's now 11.5%. It doesn't sound like much, but most people have lost 2% off their profit margin, at least in the last couple of years, with those increases, because they haven't been quoting all inclusive of super, as well as other things, not you know, increasing their fees accordingly as well. So it's really important to start doing that. In corporate environments, for example, you'll find people quote their wages or their requests as, you know, I want 150K inclusive of super. So it's quite normal for people to think that way, but it's a bit absurd in the health space. But as business owners, I think we need to start thinking and talking this way so that people understand what is being paid to them. That's a real critical point. And from here, we're going to get stuck into calculating some break-even numbers. So I just want to say before we jump in is the reason I do this calculation by 45 weeks is because we're paying for 4 weeks of annual leave. We're paying for essentially like 10 days, 11 days of public holidays, 2 weeks worth of public holidays, and these days at least a week of sick leave. So what we find is this 45 actually probably isn't even that conservative anymore. Some clinics do 44, some do 42. 45 is a nice, neat number for me. I didn't used to do it by 45, but I think culturally things have probably changed. There was a time where if we had a public holiday on a Monday, we would, I'd always work, twice as hard that week and try and squeeze 5 days into 4. But I think nowadays that's a rare practitioner. Most people are just content to do their 4 days in a short week and get by. So I think we need to factor that in, that billings are really going to dip in those short weeks. Now, in my example here, if someone's on an annual wage of $100,000, we divide it by 45 weeks and multiply it by 2, we end up with 4,444. And that is the billing target as a minimum for someone who's on 100K inclusive of super. So that's something to bear in mind. And over here, we've got a table which basically shows what that threshold is based on where someone's wage is going to be. So we can see that, for someone to be up at 150K, it's not insane numbers, like it's $6,000 a week, which is pretty solid billings. If someone's really committed to doing it, it's possible to get their numbers up there. But it also shows for a new grad, even at, what is effectively minimum wage, we still need people billing about $3,000 a week. And I think that's quite challenging for most grads in their first, 6 months, if not their first year. So it's a lot to be considered with that. Now, in the spreadsheet, we're going to jump over, input the annual wage. So I suggest for today, probably just doing one staff member, picking someone, and you can do the rest in your own time because it'll take you probably half an hour to do this, depending on the size of your team. But let's just pick one person. We're going to input their annual wage inclusive of super. And the easiest way of getting this is to just look at either their, honestly, for today, you might just have to have a guess, and you can fill it in properly later. But if you want to look at their FY24 wages, or if you want to pull up their last pay slip, which will have their year-to-date figure, which you can then multiply by 4, and that'll give you, within a reasonable threshold, given it's October 1st today, what they're going to be paid over the course of 12 months. So that's a couple of different ways of figuring out that number. If you're just contracting people on salaries, that makes it a lot easier because you know what people's salary is. So that's the first bit. And then you're going to jump into your practice management software, and we're going to pick that therapist and we're going to look at their last 12 weeks. And I think in some softwares like Clinico, I think you get the graph where you can just hover over it and you can get the numbers. And I think in others, you have to do it manually. So apologies for this. It might take some of you a little bit longer than others, but hopefully we can do this in the next 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time with that. Everyone's back in this window. So just moving on. So with regard to what we've just covered, nice one, Eves. So with regard to what we've just covered, so this is straight out of my profits course, this module. It is literally called Numbers Don't Lie. These are the exact same processes we go through. Now, it's a 12-week digital course. It's ideal for businesses who are under $1 million. And actually, I've got my next cohort launching in a week's time. So I'm really keen to get a couple more people in to finish that group off. What I'm going to do now is just share a little document with you guys, which has the details around that course as well. So that's just in the chat there. If you want to have a bit more of a look at that, by all means, feel free to message me afterwards if there's any questions. There's 3 possible outcomes we're going to get from this exercise, and sorry if you haven't had time to finish it, but I'm sure you'll be able to get through that and fill in the whole spreadsheet. So you've got all your therapists. This is literally one of the first things I do with all of my private clients, because this is the thing that moves the lever the fastest, or at least points us in the right direction. So if people are in this green zone where they're billing well above double their wage, great. Give them a pat on the back, say, well done, keep going. they're probably, bear in mind that they might be asking for a pay rise down the track. And so we want to get ahead of those type of conversations. But otherwise, we're pretty happy with that. If they're in this yellow zone, which is they're there or thereabouts. So with the spreadsheet, it's not going to show a yellow unless it's exactly identical. But if they're within, $10 or $100 of where they want to be, I'd say they're in the yellow zone, where we're happy enough, but we just need to keep an eye on their performance, because it only takes one bad week for them to slip back into the red zone. And, for that week, that's probably going to eat into a chunk of your profits. And if they're in the red zone, it's time to panic. I'm joking. We don't panic. The last thing I want you to do is panic and go whack them over the head. All this is doing is fundamentally highlighting, you guys aren't silly. We all know what's happening in our own businesses. What I find with most of my private clients when we go through this exercise is they already know the people who are struggling, but what this exercise does is it highlights perhaps how much the difference is between where they are and where they need to be. And it gives us a bit more direction as to what the next steps are. The first answer to what to do instead of panicking is look a little bit deeper. Are they getting enough new patients, and are they following up frequently enough with the new patients that are coming through? It's going to be one of those two things, if not both. So that's, again, stuff that we detail in the final segment of my course, is really how we then fill these diaries and get these people busy as well, because your team is only going to be as strong as its weakest link in there, especially when we're running businesses of, maybe 3 to 10 therapists type thing. If you've got 2 or 3 therapists sitting in that red zone, you're really going to struggle to make profits, or it's going to be off your own back, meaning you're working 50 hours a week, billing patients and getting those numbers up. That's the only way to do it. So I hope this has been really helpful for you guys today. If there are any questions, we've got a couple of minutes now at the end. I can stay on here if anyone wants to ask anything. But I encourage you to check out my profits program. I'll email around that PDF as soon as this is done. Thanks, Emily. I love that it's this simple. So the truth is the simple part is probably doing the maths around it. The hard part is executing on the other end and figuring out how we can drive those therapists up into that green zone, transitioning. And I think that's the skill of being a good business owner, is being able to take just about anyone on your team from that position upwards. And when it comes to leadership as well, what we find is if we've been able to overcome that challenge with people, it goes a long way towards our staff retention and them feeling like we've really invested in them and we've really made a difference in their career. So, it's not actually that much about money. It's really about how we lead people as well, and keeping them accountable to the goals and the direction that they need to go in. Thanks, Eves. I got the same target within $10 for my physio, and I chose, and it was way more complicated. Nice one, Emily. Yeah, I sort of broken it down as simply as I could do it. I don't like complicated things. I find it, if I can't explain it to someone, it's too complicated. So if it can be explained in a reel, that's always a good sign. Cool. A couple more minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Jump in or leave a comment in the little trail there. Awesome. I'll leave it open for another minute if there's no questions. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it, mate.
Can I just jump in and talk a question?
Yeah, go for it.
It's quicker. The physio that I looked at those numbers for through there has taken leave in the time that I'm looking at those billings for. Would we be assuming that they should hit the green zone even if they've got some leave in that chunk of time with their billings?
No, sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
Well, in my recordings, I mentioned that. But we want to make sure we're taking a clean snapshot. So ideally, a public holiday or a sick day doesn't matter. But if there's a week of leave, I'd actually...
If I take those leave out and take it 12 weeks that he hasn't taken any leave in, we're good.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I would do. I would just use either the weeks around it or the weeks leading up to it, unless there's been a real flux in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been some encouraging in the right direction, so it's quite good to see that it does come out in the right side of the green, because there's been some hard work put in. So.
Oh, well done, Emily. Nice.
No.
I think the other way of doing it is to, if it's been 1 week of annual leave in a 12-week period, that's actually a fairly normal snapshot, because like theoretically every 12 weeks someone's probably going to have a week's annual leave, and then you just multiply that by the 52 figure rather than the 45. Or divide it by 12, multiply it by 52 instead of by 45. I've probably made that sound more complicated than what it is, but that's how I do it as an alternative, or test both and see what works. For part-timers, that's a really good question. It actually does work with pro rata, because even if you just work Monday, Tuesday, you still get 4 weeks annual leave, which falls Monday, Tuesday. Accordingly, sometimes what we find is the sick leave balance tends to go up, but these calculations should work for a part-timer. What's difficult is comparison, because like with that table I showed earlier, if I jump across, these sort of figures, it's very hard to kind of make that work in terms of, I think someone's 2 years out and they're at this award level and they're at this rate. Whenever I'm doing those type of checks, I'll try and convert people to full-time equivalents, because it fits my brain a bit better, because then I go, right, someone might be paid $50 an hour or something like that. So then it works out that they're on 100 grand full-time equivalent, but they're only working 2 days a week. So that's how my brain works, just to be able to compare and contrast wages. Otherwise, I find it gets really, really confusing with part-timers. I was never a big fan of having too many part-timers in your team for that reason, as well as the fact that, it's harder to manage these issues as well, because if you have to, mentor them more, it takes up, as a percentage of the time that they're working in the business, it takes up a substantially more larger amount of time. Yeah, and it's like with email as well. Like, it's going to take a part-timer just as long to get through their emails as a full-timer, but they're going to need that time somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. We can take what we can get. Exactly. No, we've just got to work within. This is the new world we're working in, isn't it? Thanks so much, everybody, for attending. I hope you've taken something out of this, and I hope you can take away with this. Now, if anyone has any questions they want to send through later, or honestly, like if you're sitting here just going, I've got no fucking idea what Shane's just been on about, feel free to email me, get in touch. I'm happy to help you guys out. There's only a handful of people that have attended here live, so it's not too much work for me. If you are interested, the Profits course, I'll email out that link for everybody who's come through today as well. So thanks again for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. See you guys.